Welcome to Revolution Radio with the American Eagle Alliance. Today I'm here with Lawrence Hebron. We're going to be discussing the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and its effects on society. With all these guns in our society, it's inevitable we're going to keep having more and more violence, more and more death. Well, let's look at that for a second. Let's take an analytical approach to that for just a moment. Sure, we have a lot of violence in our society today. Places like Chicago, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Los Angeles. Violence is out of control. Just this past week, we've had 2 major ambush-style shootings of law enforcement. 5 dead police officers in Dallas, 3 more in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Right out of an apocalyptic style movie almost. You would never think that we would see that in our society today. Well, let's look at societies that don't have any guns. Let's look at societies where guns have completely been outlawed and there are extremely tight nationalized police forces in control. The first one that comes to mind for me is the Gestapo in Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany had very, very strict gun control laws. Sure, they allowed Heinrich to go out with his shotgun and shoot some pheasant, but the idea of having a handgun or a Sturmgewehr in their closet was unheard of. Let's look at Stalin's Russia. Do you honestly think that there was a right to protect yourself in Russia? Look at the totalitarian control. One of the things that we need to look at in our society today is how much we want government controlling our lives. And so today I'm here with Lawrence Hebron, and we're going to discuss the Second Amendment a little bit and weapons in our society. To me, a firearm is nothing but a tool like a hammer, a tool like a car or a truck, a tool like a screwdriver. It has a very specific purpose. If you want to drive a screw, you use a screwdriver. If you want to pound a nail, you use a hammer. If you want to pound a railroad spike, you use a sledgehammer. So if you intend to inflict violence, you use a firearm. You use a weapon. Well, it's obvious that firearms were designed for that very specific purpose. But does the tool have a place in our society? In order to answer that, we've got to ask ourselves a question. Do we, as citizens, have a right to protect ourselves, to protect our families, to protect our lives? So I'm going to ask Lawrence to give us his thoughts on where we stand with the right to keep and bear arms, the natural right, the inalienable right of self-defense, self-protection, protection of our families.
Well, you're talking about the right to keep and bear arms. Of course, that's from the Second Amendment. But there are a lot of people today who are questioning whether or not it should be a right. And in that, they are presuming to be more wise and more intelligent than people like, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and so forth. The question here, though, is being revisited because of all of the violence that's been taking place. And there's been a lot of violence here in recent years. There's been a significant uptick in violent crimes across the country. Now, the presumption seems to be that if we restrict the number of weapons out there, we'll also restrict the amount of crime. But this is foolish. If you talked about the inevitability of more deaths and more violence if we have these weapons. Well, yeah, but if we outlaw the guns, we'll talk about the inevitability of more deaths and more violence because of knives, because of sticks, because of fists, because of teeth. That's part of our nature. Our nature is a violent one, and we will use whatever's available to us. It's interesting that not too long ago, there was another terrorist attack in the city of Nice, France. This guy didn't use a gun. He didn't use a knife. He didn't use a stick. He rented a truck and used it to plow down scores of people. I don't hear anybody clamoring, though, for more truck control. The thing is, that is part of our nature. Now, given that that is part of our nature, what is the best answer we can come up with? Some people, the simplistic ones, or those who have another agenda, say that we need to outlaw guns. But if you outlaw guns, then all you're going to do is make it a whole lot easier for those people who still retain the guns and who still retain violent force at their disposal, and that's the government. See, the Second Amendment isn't really there to help us be able to hunt and provide food for our families. It isn't really there to protect us from the occasional intruder who might break into our house. It isn't there so that we can punch holes in targets so many meters downrange. All of those things apply, but the main reason for the Second Amendment is to protect we the people from the greatest bully, the greatest abuser of human rights, the greatest mass murderer in history. And that has always been government in some form or another. And the founders understood this. The founders and framers wrote the Second Amendment in there because they knew that without it, all the other rights would be in jeopardy. You know, in the Declaration, we expressed the philosophy of government. We said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now, if you don't see that as a philosophy of government, try reading those passages backwards, and here's what you get. Governments are instituted or created among men to secure these rights that are endowed by their Creator. In other words, the rightful role of government, according to the American philosophy of government, is to do the work of God. Most specifically, to secure these rights. Well, which rights? The holy trinity of rights to the founders were life, property, and liberty. But they were realists. These people were not only students of history, they were makers of history. They knew how things worked. And they know that if you do not have the ability to defend your other rights forcefully, you will not have those other rights. And it's just that simple. And that's why they wrote the Second Amendment into the Bill of Rights. Without the Second Amendment, notions like life, liberty, property are just nice things you embroider on a doily somewhere and hang over the armrest of your love seat. It's not going to have any reality in your life. We need the Second Amendment to protect all of the other rights. So, the question is, does gun control work? Yeah, it works very well if you're a tyrant, because it will take away the ability of the people to defend their own rights and their own liberties.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the Declaration of Independence. Now, we've advocated for some time that the Declaration of Independence is, in fact, the founding document of our country. And with the Declaration of Independence, it also states in there, basically addresses the fact that when governments abuse these rights, when a government no longer represents its people, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish that government. And how is that possible? How is that possible if the populace is not armed? If the populace does not retain the right and the ability to exercise their sovereignty, their power over the government? It can't be done. In fact, it is even questionable whether or not an armed citizenry armed with modern-day assault rifles can stand up to an army that is operating M1 tanks, Apache helicopters, and F-35 jets. Now, it's obvious that we are in a situation today where your life, the life of your family, is in peril. Today we are residing in a tinderbox that is ready to go into a flash fire. We have unrest in the streets. We have ambush killings of police officers. We have leaders of the Nation of Islam calling for the assassination of whites and police officers. Now, how are you going to protect yourself? How are you going to protect your family if you do not have the ability to do so with modern-day arms?
Absolutely. I think we have a historical precedent for this that really applies today. Back shortly before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Admiral Yamamoto was part of the Imperial High Command, the military high command for Japan. And there was some talk about invading the United States. Now, Yamamoto had actually gone to college in the United States. He knew about America, and he knew Americans. And he urged strongly against that idea. He knew the preponderance of weapons that existed across the country. He says, if you invade the United States, he says, there will be a rifle behind every blade of grass, behind every tree. And they never did invade the United States. Now, the fact that we are so well armed, the fact that we do have force at our disposal, kept us from being invaded by a tyrannical government. That applies today. Except sadly, now that tyrannical government is not outside our borders, it is inside our borders. The government of the United States is becoming increasingly tyrannical. It is assuming unto itself more and more power and taking away more and more liberties from us, as well as freedom, as well as our wealth. So, the day may come, I hope it doesn't, but the day may come when we will have to defend ourselves against our own government. If we are unarmed, we will have no chance of accomplishing that. So that's what it boils down to. Those who know their history know that I am right. If you look back at history, as Dave was saying just a little bit ago, why did Hitler want to disarm the German people? Why did Stalin want to disarm the various republics in the Soviet Union? Why did Mao want to disarm the people in China? Because that's the best way to maintain a tyranny. In fact, you cannot maintain a tyranny where the people are armed. So, do we have violence in this country? Yes. Are there a lot of shootings in places like Chicago and Detroit and D.C.? Yes. But here's our choice. So you never get the option of a perfect solution. So our choice is this. Do we want to have guns and have situations like we do in Chicago and Detroit and D.C. and elsewhere? Or do you want to not have guns and have the kind of tyranny that existed in Red China, in Soviet Russia, and in Nazi Germany? That's it. That's what it boils down to. There is no perfect solution. There will be no violent, free solution unless it's under tyranny.
So I frequently hear from the left this term that nobody wants to take away your guns. Why are you not willing to register your firearms? I mean, you register your car, you buy insurance for your car, don't you? Why do you not want to register your guns? Well, first of all, I don't want my name on a list. Second of all, throughout history, registration has always been a prelude to confiscation. So let's look at this and see if it actually pans out to be true. Well, here in California in about 1989, they passed an assault weapons ban, outlawing several different types of weapons. So what happened? They immediately forced registration, and it was a dismal failure. Overnight, the state of California created thousands of felons, thousands and thousands of felons in the state for those people who refused to register their weapons. The firearms industry came up with ways to go around the ban, creating add-on components that would make the weapons legal for those jurisdictions like California. So here we are today again, and the state of California is passing more restrictive gun laws, trying to restrict access to the tool, not the emotion of the heart. And so now we have thousands of more overnight felons with the threat of confiscation. Now, we know that the state of California has developed a whole division of law enforcement dedicated to the enforcement of firearm laws. So, are they going to go door to door and attempt to confiscate these weapons? That's a big question. It hasn't been addressed by the state. How are they going to enforce these laws? Unfortunately, we know the ones that are going to be told to go enforce it, and that is law enforcement. And in order for law enforcement to enforce that law, they are going to be violating their oath to the Constitution. Those laws are a blatant, unconstitutional demand on law enforcement, and law enforcement knows it. The state knows it. The government knows it. They don't care. One of the biggest problems that I see today is the government, including the federal government and most all of the state governments, are operating outside of their constitutional authority. It is so blatant that they just don't care. So one needs to ask, if there is no constitutional limits on the power of the government, what limits are there? What are the limits? The Constitution is the limit, and they are not living within the bounds of the Constitution. So we as a people need to figure out how we are going to reply to those demands. Now, there are several Second Amendment rallies planned for this coming weekend around the state of California. They'll be taking place in Sacramento, Anaheim, San Diego that I'm aware of, and they are anticipating well over 1,000 people at these events. So what recourse do they have? What recourse does the people have against the state of California when the California government has basically thumbed its nose at the Constitution? What do you think, Lawrence?
I think it's time to thumb our nose at the government. It's very clear that they are taking an unconstitutional stance. And when they do that, when they abuse our rights, then we are forced into a situation that existed about 240 years ago in the colonies. We tried to work with the British overlords for decades. We petitioned for a redress of grievances. We played by their rules. We played the game as they defined it. And things kept getting worse and worse and worse because they knew they had the power, and they assumed that we would not buck the power. The time has come to buck the power, ladies and gentlemen. You see, we have been trained to think and act inside of boxes that were made by the box makers to keep us under control. As long as we oblige them, as long as we continue to think and act as they want us to, they win, we lose. It's just that simple. You see, the game is rigged. The deck is stacked. If we keep playing the game by their rules, they will win. It's kind of like going to Vegas and betting against the house. You might win an occasional hand. You might win an occasional jackpot. But if you play long enough, you will lose everything. Now, given the fact that this is the way the game has been rigged, the way it's being played now, we the people only have two options. We either resign ourselves to the reality of our defeat and the loss of our liberties, or we play a different game. And that's what is described in my book, AR2 Handbook for the Second American Revolution. The AR2 strategy is an amazingly powerful, effective, and simple strategy that will allow us to fight and win the Second American Revolution in less time than it took to win the first, without taking over the White House, the Congress, the Supreme Court, or any constitutional amendments. And it is all entirely constitutional and hopefully peaceful. It can be implemented peacefully, but that was the ideal of AR1, American Revolution number 1 as well, and that didn't work out too well, and it may not work out this time. But we the people have to decide, is this important enough to us to fight, or are we just going to roll over? There are a lot of us out there who are not going to roll over. And the AR2 plan explains how to do this. But let me just tell you one thing that would be extremely effective and extremely fast. I advised a candidate for governor of the state of California a few years back, and he accepted this principle if he were elected. Here's how your Second Amendment rights could be immediately restored upon the election of a proper elected official, a governor or even a sheriff, or the conversion of an existing one. If we had an existing governor or an existing sheriff who adopted these principles, you could start to see results tomorrow. I am not kidding, tomorrow. Now, here's just one suggestion, just one little hint at what we can do. Chief executives, like presidents and governors, typically have the power of pardon. Now, usually when you read about this, it's when they're going out of office and they pardon all the reprobate kids of their reprobate friends. But what if we use the power of pardon constructively? Now, here's what I suggested to this candidate for governor, and he adopted it. The suggestion is this: since the governor has the power of pardon, what if a governor announced, I am granting a blanket pardon to individuals, organizations, and businesses that did, are, or will violate, and then you list all of those state and federal laws that have infringed our Second Amendment rights. What just happened? You just unwrote all those laws. Now, in fact, it would not change the law, but it would change law enforcement. What district attorney is going to prosecute us criminals, maybe because we had a 16-round magazine for our handgun instead of the required 10-round? Who's going to prosecute when they know that the instant the judge's gavel hits his bench and he says guilty, the governor says pardoned? It's like it never even happened. And if you do get some hardcore jerk that just has a problem with the Second Amendment and decides he's going to prosecute anyway, well, fine. He just gave his opponent in the next election an excellent campaign issue to deal with, because the current DA is wasting the taxpayers' dollars, times, resources, all of that's business, and money, because he knows full well that the governor is going to pardon anybody who's convicted according to these unconstitutional laws. So there's one thing right there. You see, as soon as we refuse to think and act inside of the box that was made for us, there's all kinds of options out there for us. And we can start taking this back, and we can start taking it back in a matter of months, weeks, days. All we need are some courageous constitutional sheriffs, constitutional governors who say, you know what, these laws are not constitutional, and I'm not enforcing them. And that's a big part of what is in AR2. There's a whole lot more in there, but just to show you the promise that is available to us with a little guts and with a constitutional basis that's offered in AR2 called linkage, that gives us firm ground to stand on. So there is a lot we can do, but we must resolve to fight back. We must resolve that we've gotten to the point where we're not going to take it anymore. Remember, AR1, the first American Revolution, the shooting war started when the British came after our weapons and our munitions. AR2 may very well start the same way. And the only way to keep that violence from happening is to start implementing these principles now. And constitutional sheriffs and constitutional governors can do exactly that. So let's start supporting them. And if you have any question about that, if you'd like to have me or some of our other folks come along and talk to one of your organizations about the AR2 strategy, I urge you to call 909-913-7878. 909-913-7878 and arrange for us to come out and explain it to you. And you can join the revolution.